So I have been redesigning signs in New York City without anyone asking me to. I'll find a sign that needs some work, give it a makeover, and post the new one by the original. For example, walking around the East Village, I found this sign for Quality Dry Cleaners. It's actually called Quality Plus Dry Cleaners. If you can see, they made this sign by putting a poster onto a poster board. This is a very generic poster that you could find at a lot of dry cleaners, but the thing is, they're working within the confines of this metal fence, which leaves a very awkward strip of white space off to the side. By the time they got to pickup and delivery over here, they ran out of ink and space, so all they were able to fit in was pickup and Dell. Meanwhile, organic is pretty much Oga, or guy, or gay, Ogai. All that being said, I think this local storefront could benefit from a new sign. Before I even make my Photoshop document, I need to make sure I've got the right dimensions, because this sign should be able to fit within the same metal frame as the other one. The very first idea I had was for the title. When I think of an established, trustworthy New York business, I think about this vintage cursive text that mimics the look of a hand-painted sign. Let's hit Adobe Fonts and find something like this. This one's close, but it's too modern, too fancy. This one's cool, but not for a dry cleaner. This one is close, but it's too, like, sports team. Okay, this is the one. It's this kind of vintage look that says, "We've been around here for a while. Don't worry, your clothes are safe with us." The other typeface I'm using is called Novecento. It's also got a pretty timeless kind of look, and it's very straightforward, very readable. I like it. I leaned even further into the vintage thing with this overprint effect. I made one word red, one word blue, and set the blend mode on the red one to multiply, so now whenever they overlap, it actually creates this dark purple, as if the ink from both words are mixing into one another. Now, something that bothers me that I don't think anyone is gonna notice is that this typeface is meant to be mimicking a hand-painted sign, but to me, it just looks too perfect. It looks too digital. So what I'm gonna do is lower the opacity on this layer and use it as a template to trace over the text and make it feel more handmade. This gives it some imperfections. It also gives me the opportunity to make some adjustments, like changing the Q a little bit. I changed the Y, and I made the dot on the I a little sparkle, as if to say clean. One issue that I have with this original sign is that the only imagery on it is this sunflower, which I guess kind of represents like fresh smells and the fact that it's eco-friendly and all that. But I think if you were passing by this sign and you weren't really paying attention to it, I'm not sure your brain would register that this is a dry cleaners. So what I came up with next is to draw these top-down illustrations of people working on clothes, which to me graphically looks pretty cool. It also gives this impression of the business working as this like well-oiled machine. And then I can actually have text underneath that corresponds to each illustration. I wanted each block of text to have this boxy, uniform type of look. So I used the shape tool and created these rectangles that I duplicated across the page as basically guidelines. Then I used free transform on each line of text to squash and stretch it within these parameters. The whole bottom third of this poster is getting pretty busy, so for the rest of it, let's keep it simple. If you use the ellipse tool and make a circle, you could actually hover the type tool over the edge and create curved text. I do this a lot. The original sign had a flower on it, so I drew some flowers. At this point, I'm pretty much just using red and blue as my only colors. Having a limited color palette can be kind of challenging, but in the end, helps make for a more cohesive image. You may have noticed that my taste tends to lean towards very vintage, handmade looking things, which means I gotta jump through a lot of hoops digitally to make sure that my work doesn't look like it was made digitally. So let's add a bunch of fake paper textures to this so the final sign doesn't come out too perfect. Also, I'm sorry for not naming my layers. This design is done, so what I'm gonna do is take all the layers except for the background, put them into a group, duplicate that group, and then flatten it. What I'm doing here is taking the whole design and putting it onto one layer while keeping a copy of all those individual layers in a separate hidden group. Then I go into Distort Wave and I set the settings to this. This is the little formula that I use to create a crispy, distressed, rough edge around all the edges. Now, hear me out. Change your colors to white over black, make a new layer, then go to Filter, Render, Clouds. You get this weird cloud effect, but stay with me for a second. Go to Filter, Other, High Pass, and it creates more of a random, grainy sort of thing. We're not done. Go to Filter Gallery and put on a mixture of torn edges, ocean ripple, and graphic pen, and mess around with these until you've got something that looks like this rough, grainy paper texture. Now, if you set the blend mode of this layer to screen, your image looks awful. It makes it look like the sign has been damaged, it's been out in the sun, it's gotten wet, but it's got this papery texture and feel to it. Now, what we can do is use this texture very selectively. What I'm gonna do is put a mask onto this layer, and if we fill it in with black, then change our color to white and move to a very soft, low opacity brush, we can actually very subtly draw with this paper texture. For text, and especially when you have a nice big bold font, I found that it looks best when you trace over each letter individually and aim for the middle of the line so that the outer edges of each letter are the boldest, darkest part, and the inside is the part that's washed out. I don't know why this looks good, but to me, it just looks good. Now we're gonna go a step further. We're gonna duplicate that grainy texture that we made before. Make a new layer on top of that. Fill the new layer in with our blue color, then set that blue color to a screen blend mode. We can merge these layers together and set the blend mode to multiply, and now we've got a blue texture. Why would you want a blue texture? Well, what you can do is make a mask on this, set the mask to black, get a soft white brush just like before, and if we draw around the areas that are blue, it creates this ink smudgy bleed effect, which really makes the ink on the page feel very physical. I did this with the red color too, and you can really feel like the paper and the ink smudging and pressing against one another. It's a small detail, but to me, it really sells that distressed look. Here it is, it's ready to print. I had actually dropped off an order last week at this dry cleaners just to make sure they're legit. They did fix my pants, and I fixed their sign. If you think about it, dry cleaners and graphic designers kind of work well together, you know, like us artists reel people in with the pretty colors, and then the dry cleaners clean those people's clothes. Clean designs, clean clothes, we're cleaning up the streets with the help of Photoshop. I hope you learned something from this video. You can go ahead and use these tips to create something in Photoshop for yourself, or maybe for someone else. Thanks for watching.